I spent 3 years building my startup in silence, while my family treated me like the daughter who couldn't get her life together. So when I walked into that boardroom and saw my younger sister Ashley presenting my idea to investors, my chest went hollow. She used my slides, my concept, even my grandmother's dying words twisted into her inspiration story. Grandfather beamed at her like she was the sun. Then he turned to me and said, "You could learn a lot from your sister." Everyone laughed, but I didn't, because Ashley had no idea what she'd just stolen or what it would cost her. The stories on this channel are created solely for entertainment, educational, and storytelling purposes. While some stories are inspired by real situations submitted by viewers via email, most details have been fictionalized, combined, or altered. My name is Brittany Shaw. I'm 35 years old, and I work as a product strategy consultant for tech startups, the kind of job my family has never understood and never tried to. For 3 years, I've also been building something of my own, an app designed to help seniors live independently. It's not just a business idea. It's a promise I made to someone who can no longer remember my name. To understand what happened in that boardroom, you need to understand the house I grew up in and the people who shaped it. My father, Richard Shaw, died in a car accident when I was 12. Ashley was only 7. Our mother, Patricia, remarried 2 years later and slowly drifted out of our lives. She still sent Christmas cards and showed up for the occasional birthday, but she always looked uncomfortable around our grandfather Harold, like she was waiting for permission to leave. Eventually, she stopped waiting and just stayed away. I don't hate her for it. She chose peace over us. Some people aren't built for battle. Harold became everything after that. Our guardian, our provider, our judge. He raised us the same way he built Shaw Industries with control calculation and the unshakable belief that everyone owed him something. Love in our house wasn't given freely. It was earned, measured, and frequently withdrawn. But my grandmother Eleanor was different. She was warmth in a cold house. She remembered birthdays without being reminded. She asked questions and actually listened to the answers. When Alzheimer's began stealing her mind 7 years ago, the rest of the family treated it like an inconvenience, something to be managed by nurses and ignored at dinner parties. Only I sat with her through the confusion, the repeated questions, the slow and terrible disappearance of the woman she used to be. Before she forgot my face entirely, she held my hand one afternoon and said, "Don't let old age become a burden. Do something about it." That's why I built the app. That's why I spent 3 years of late nights and empty weekends turning her words into something real. It wasn't about money or recognition. It was about keeping a promise to the only person who ever truly believed in me. So, when Harold called me personally, not through his assistant, not through a group message, and invited me to a family weekend retreat at the Connecticut house, I didn't know what to think. He said he wanted to reconnect. He said he wanted to hear about my work. In 15 years, he had never organized a family gathering. He had never once asked what I was building. Hope is a dangerous thing when you've been invisible your whole life. I wanted to believe people could change. At the retreat, Harold asked me to present my project. I shared everything: the prototype, the vision, the story of grandmother's final years. My voice cracked when I talked about her. Even Ashley seemed moved, asking detailed questions about the technical architecture, the authentication systems, the data structure. I answered everything, desperate to finally be seen as competent. That night, I woke at 2 a.m. and found Ashley at my laptop, a USB drive inserted into the port. She looked up without guilt. "Just reviewing the demo," she said. "Go back to sleep." I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. By morning, I confirmed what I already knew: my files had been copied. But I noticed something else that made my stomach turn. Harold's bedroom light had been on at 2 a.m. He wasn't surprised by what Ashley did. He had been waiting for it. What none of them knew was this: 3 months before that retreat, I had embedded a creator signature into my system, a security measure I learned from a mentor who warned me that trust is expensive and theft is cheap. The code would run normally in my environment, but the moment someone tried to deploy it to a real production server, it would lock. A red screen. A single demand. Original creator verification required. I didn't build that trap for Ashley. I built it because the startup world taught me to protect myself, but it was about to save everything. 3 weeks later, I received an email from grandfather's office. Important family meeting, major investor presentation, my presence required. I checked the metadata. The email had been drafted the same day as our family retreat, before Ashley had copied a single file. Harold hadn't reacted to an opportunity. He had created one. The morning of the investor meeting, I drove to Shaw Industries headquarters with my hands steady on the wheel and my heart beating somewhere in my throat. I told myself I was prepared. I told myself I knew what was coming. But nothing could have prepared me for the way it actually felt to watch my sister steal my life in real time. The executive conference room was already full when I arrived. 12 people sat around the polished mahogany table, including 4 representatives from Meridian Healthcare Fund, 3 board members I recognized from company photos, and my grandfather at the head of it all. Ashley stood at the podium, a clicker in her hand, my slides projected on the screen behind her. She was wearing a navy blazer I had never seen before and an expression of humble confidence that she must have practiced in the mirror for hours. My grandmother Eleanor taught me that dignity doesn't expire with age. Ashley said, her voice trembling with emotion that sounded almost real. In her final years, I watched her struggle with the isolation that so many seniors face. I promised myself I would do something about it. The investors nodded approvingly. One of them wrote something in his notebook. Another smiled at Ashley like she was the most inspiring person he had ever encountered. I stood frozen in the doorway watching my sister tell my story, my concept, my promise to the woman who raised me when no one else wanted to. Ashley had taken everything down to the exact words I had used at the retreat. She had even borrowed grandmother's dying wish and claimed it as her own inspiration. Harold sat at the head of the table with an expression I had never seen directed at me in 35 years of life. Pride. Genuine, undisguised pride. But it was aimed at Ashley, and when he noticed me standing at the door, his face shifted into something else entirely. Tolerance. The kind of patient acknowledgement you give to someone who showed up to a party they weren't really invited to. I opened my mouth to speak, but Harold raised his hand. "Brittany, please. This is Ashley's moment. Take a seat." I sat. What else could I do? Make a scene in front of investors. Accuse my sister of theft with no proof anyone would believe I was the older sister who was still finding her direction, still figuring things out. Ashley was the talented one, the natural, the heir apparent. That was the story Harold had been telling for years, and everyone in that room already believed it. After Ashley finished her presentation, the lead investor turned to look at me. "And who is this?" Harold answered before I could open my mouth. "My other granddaughter. She does consulting work, still finding her direction." He said it the way a doctor might say a patient's prognosis was uncertain. Not cruel exactly, but final. Dismissive. A verdict delivered without appeal. Ashley smiled sweetly and added her own touch. "Brittany has been so supportive through this whole process. I've learned so much watching her try different things over the years." The room chuckled softly at the humble younger sister, graciously praising her struggling older sibling. I finally understood why I had been invited. I wasn't there to witness Ashley's success. I was there to be the contrast, the cautionary tale, the sister who couldn't make it sitting in the back row while the family star took her rightful place in the spotlight. The investors requested one final step before transferring the initial funding. They needed to connect the system to their testing servers for technical validation. A standard procedure, they explained, just to make sure everything worked as promised before the money moved. Ashley agreed without hesitation. Harold beamed like a man who had just won a war no one else knew was being fought. I sat in silence through the rest of the meeting, my face carefully blank, my mind running calculations that had nothing to do with surrender. Afterward, I walked to the parking garage alone. My heels echoed against the concrete, and the sound felt like the loneliest thing in the world. I was almost to my car when I heard someone calling my name. Margaret Chen stepped out from behind a pillar. She was Harold's executive assistant, had been for 26 years. More importantly, she had been my grandmother Eleanor's closest friend. She was the woman who held my grandmother's hand at the funeral while Harold gave a eulogy that somehow managed to be entirely about himself. Margaret was trembling. "I need to show you something." We sat in her car with the doors locked and the engine off. She pulled out her phone and showed me security footage from the vacation house in Connecticut. The family office had cameras that fed into a system Margaret had access to because Harold trusted her with the administrative passwords years ago. On the screen, I watched Ashley copying files from my laptop at 2 a.m, and in the window behind her, clearly visible, was Harold's silhouette, watching, waiting, making sure his plan was executed properly. "He asked me about your startup 2 weeks before that retreat," Margaret whispered. "He wanted details, how far along you were, whether you had shown it to anyone else. Then he specifically requested that Ashley's guest room be right next to yours." I stared at the footage. This wasn't an opportunity she stumbled into. "This was architecture," Margaret said. "He designed every piece of it." She told me the rest then. 2 years ago, a young marketing manager named Daniel Morrison had developed a breakthrough strategy for Shaw Industries' healthcare division. He had worked on it for months, preparing for his big presentation to the board. But the day before Daniel's scheduled pitch, Ashley presented the exact same strategy. Word for word, slide for slide. Daniel resigned a week later in humiliation. Everyone assumed Ashley was simply brilliant, that she had independently arrived at the same conclusions through her own genius. Margaret knew the truth. Harold had told Ashley about Daniel's presentation. He had given her access to the files. He called it teaching her to be competitive. "This is what he does," Margaret said quietly. "He finds talent in other people and transfers it to Ashley. He's been doing it for years." She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. Catherine Webb, attorney at law. The name meant nothing to me. "Your grandmother hired her privately 5 years ago," Margaret explained. "When Eleanor was still lucid enough to understand what her husband really was. Catherine has documents that Eleanor prepared, legal documents, with instructions to contact you if the family ever showed you who they really are." My throat tightened. Grandmother knew this might happen. Eleanor knew Harold better than anyone. She spent 40 years watching him take credit for other people's work. She wanted to make sure you had protection when you finally needed it. That night, I called Catherine Webb. She answered on the second ring, as if she had been waiting by the phone for years. "Your grandmother left you a letter and a legal document," Catherine said. "Notarized, witnessed, ironclad. She made me promise to deliver it only when you were ready to fight." "What does it say?" Catherine paused. When she spoke again, her voice was heavy with the weight of a secret kept too long. "It says Harold Shaw built his empire on a stolen idea. And it wasn't Ashley's theft he was covering up, it was his own." The week between Catherine Webb's revelation and the technical validation day was the longest of my life. I read my grandmother's letter so many times that I memorized every word. I studied the legal documents she had prepared. I understood now why Eleanor had spent 40 years as the quiet wife, the supportive shadow, the woman who smiled at company events while her husband took credit for the empire she had helped him build. She had been waiting, preparing, making sure that when the time came, her granddaughter would have everything she needed to fight back. The technical validation was scheduled for 10 in the morning at Shaw Industries' main server facility. This was the final step before Meridian Healthcare Fund transferred the initial $4.2 million in seed funding. The room was packed when I arrived. Investors, lawyers, IT specialists, 3 board members, and of course, Harold and Ashley. Everyone who mattered was there to witness what was supposed to be Ashley's crowning achievement. I arrived 5 minutes late on purpose. I wanted them to start without me. I wanted Ashley to feel confident, to believe she had already won. When I walked through the door, every head turned. Ashley glanced over from her position near the main screen, and I saw the barely concealed triumph in her eyes. She thought I had come to watch her succeed. She thought I was there to witness my own irrelevance one final time. "Glad you could make it, Brittany," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. I smiled at her. A real smile. The kind of smile you give someone when you know something they don't. "I wouldn't miss this for anything in the world." Harold noticed that smile. I saw his eyes narrow slightly, saw the first flicker of uncertainty cross his face. He had spent 68 years reading people manipulating them, staying 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room. But he couldn't read me. Not anymore. And that made him nervous. The IT team began the connection process. Ashley stood beside the main screen, ready to demonstrate the interface she had rehearsed 100 times. She looked polished and professional, every inch the brilliant young entrepreneur she was pretending to be. The lead investor from Meridian watched with approval. The board members nodded along. Harold sat at the head of the table like a king, surveying his domain, already preparing the speech he would give afterward to announce Ashley as his chosen successor for CEO. The connection initialized. The loading bar crawled across the screen. Ashley's fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to begin her demonstration the moment the system went live. And then the screen turned red. Large white letters appeared against the crimson background. "System locked. Production environment detected. Original creator. Verification required." Ashley's face drained of color. She clicked the mouse, frantically typing commands, trying to bypass the lock. Nothing responded. The red screen sat there like an accusation demanding authentication from someone who wasn't her. The lead investor frowned. "What's happening?" Ashley's voice cracked. "It's a server compatibility issue. Just give me a minute to troubleshoot." One of the IT specialists leaned forward, reading the diagnostic information scrolling beneath the error message. He shook his head slowly. "This isn't a compatibility issue. This is a creator verification lock. The system is asking for authentication from whoever originally built it." Every eye in the room turned to Ashley. She stood frozen at the podium, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The confident entrepreneur had vanished. In her place was a woman who had just realized she was standing on a stage with no script and no way out. I stood up slowly from my seat in the back corner. My voice was calm when I spoke, almost conversational, as if I were explaining something simple to a room full of confused children. "That's my creator signature. It's like an artist signing the corner of a painting. Invisible until someone tries to sell a forgery." I walked to the front of the room, my laptop in hand. The crowd parted for me without a word. I connected to the projector and pulled up my files while everyone watched in stunned silence. "I built this system," I said. "The core architecture, the authentication protocols, the user interface, every line of code that matters. I have original files time-stamped 4 months before Ashley's presentation. I have email correspondence with the freelance developers I hired through certified platforms to help with specific components, And I have security footage from our family retreat showing exactly when and how my work was copied. I turned to face Harold directly. His face had turned to stone, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. He was already trying to figure out how to spin this, how to minimize the damage, how to regain control of a situation that had spiraled beyond his grasp. "You knew all of this, didn't you, grandfather?" My voice didn't waver. "You asked Margaret about my project 2 weeks before that retreat. You arranged the guest room assignments so Ashley would be right next to me. You were awake at 2 in the morning, watching through your window while she copied my files. You orchestrated this entire scheme because you needed Ashley to have a big win before you announced her as your successor for CEO." The room was silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Ashley broke first. "She's lying!" She screamed, her voice rising to a pitch I had never heard before. "She set me up. She planted that lock to make me look bad. This is sabotage. I didn't set anyone up." I cut in my voice, still calm against her hysteria. "I protected my work using standard industry practice. Every serious developer does it. You stole something you didn't understand, and now you're facing the consequences. That's not a trap. That's accountability." I turned to address the investors directly. "You're not just looking at stolen intellectual property. You're looking at a pattern. 2 years ago, a Shaw Industries employee named Daniel Morrison had his marketing strategy stolen by Ashley with Harold's coordination. Daniel resigned in humiliation while Ashley took credit for his work. Before that, there may be others. If I were you, I would recommend that your legal team conduct a full audit before any further engagement with this company." The lead investor stood up, his face grim. "We're halting this validation immediately. Our legal department will conduct a formal review of this situation and Shaw Industries' broader business practices. If Ms. Shaw's evidence holds up under examination, we'll be filing reports with the SEC and evaluating potential fraud claims against everyone involved." Harold finally spoke. His voice was tight-controlled, but I could hear the desperation underneath. "Brittany, let's discuss this privately. I'm sure we can come to some arrangement that works for everyone." I looked at my grandfather, the man who had raised me, the man who had controlled every aspect of my life for 23 years, the man who had engineered my humiliation and stolen my work to benefit the granddaughter he actually loved. "No, grandfather," I said quietly. "You wanted a public stage for Ashley. Now you have one. Sit down." For the first time in 40 years, Harold Shaw did as he was told. Ashley fled the room in tears, pushing past the investors and disappearing down the hallway. The Meridian team gathered their things and left with their lawyers already making phone calls before they reached the elevator. The board members huddled together, whispering among themselves and looking at Harold like they had never truly seen him before. But I wasn't finished. Catherine Webb had given me my grandmother's letter and the legal documents that came with it. Harold knew what those documents contained. I could see it in his face, the way his eyes kept darting to my laptop bag, the way his hands gripped the armrests of his chair. He had always known this day might come. He had spent 40 years making sure it wouldn't. He had failed. The aftermath of that validation day came swift and brutal like a wave that had been building for 40 years and finally crashed against the shore. Meridian Healthcare Fund formally withdrew from the deal within 48 hours and filed a complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding material misrepresentation. The investigation was public. The headlines were merciless. Shaw Industries stock dropped 18% in 2 weeks, wiping out hundreds of millions in market value. 3 board members demanded an emergency meeting to discuss leadership transition. The untouchable empire was cracking from the inside out. Daniel Morrison saw the news coverage and recognized the pattern immediately. A journalist tracking the story reached out to him and Daniel responded with a detailed post on LinkedIn describing his own experience 2 years earlier. He didn't make legal claims because the statute of limitations had passed, but he didn't need to. His corroborated account of how Ashley had stolen his marketing strategy with Harold's coordination went viral in healthcare industry circles. Margaret provided a supporting statement confirming everything Daniel said. After 26 years of silence, she was finally free of her fear. Ashley was terminated from Shaw Industries within the week. The official statement said she was leaving to pursue other opportunities. Everyone knew the truth. My attorney sent a civil lawsuit for intellectual property theft, and Ashley's legal team advised her to settle immediately to avoid worse publicity. The settlement was $1.2 million payable over 10 years. Ashley liquidated her investments and sold her downtown condo. The woman who had never worked for anything in her life would spend the next decade working to pay off debt. 3 weeks after the validation disaster, Harold appeared at my apartment. I had never seen him outside of family property or corporate settings. He looked diminished standing in my doorway, smaller somehow, like the air had been let out of him. The untouchable patriarch had become what he always was underneath the power and the money, a frightened old man watching his legacy crumble. He didn't apologize. Harold Shaw had never apologized for anything in his life, and he wasn't about to start now. Instead, he negotiated. "Name your price," he said, settling into my second-hand couch like it offended him. "Equity in the company, a board seat. I'll create a position for you. Executive Vice President of Innovation. Whatever you want, Brittany. Just tell me what it will take to make this go away." "I don't want anything you can give me, grandfather." His voice hardened. "Then what is this revenge you want to destroy? Everything I built because you're angry about being overlooked." "I'm not angry. I'm finished pretending. If you release Eleanor's letter, I'll sue you for defamation. I'll tie you up in court for years. I have lawyers who will make your life miserable until you're too exhausted to fight. You'll what?" My voice was quiet, but it stopped him cold. "Sue me for telling the truth. Let me explain what happens if you fight this. I release grandmother's letter publicly. Your board sees documented proof that Shaw Industries was built on an idea you stole from your own wife and erased her contribution for 40 years. The SEC investigation expands from Ashley's theft to yours. Your legacy doesn't just end, it gets rewritten. You become a case study in corporate fraud taught in business schools as an example of what not to do." I let that sink in. I watched his face cycle through anger calculation and finally something that looked almost like defeat. "Or," I continued, "you can accept my terms, step down, with whatever dignity you have left and let the family keep some of what you built. Your choice, grandfather. But make it now because my patience ran out somewhere. Around the moment you used grandmother's dying words to sell my stolen work to investors." Harold sat in silence. I pulled out grandmother's letter and began to read. Not for him, for myself. I needed to hear her words out loud to finally understand the full weight of what she had carried for 4 decades. 40 years ago, I developed the business model that became Shaw Industries. Harold was failing at everything he tried. 3 businesses bankrupt, investors refusing his calls, our savings nearly gone. I showed him my concept one night, just thinking out loud at the kitchen table. A week later, he presented it to investors as his own idea. I never expected credit. Wives supported their husbands back then. That was simply how things worked. But I never expected him to erase me completely. To tell everyone it was his genius alone. To make me into just the wife who got lucky by marrying a brilliant man. When I saw how he treated you, Brittany, the way he dismissed you for being too much like me, I recognized the pattern. He fears capable women because we remind him of what he really is. I'm leaving you this letter, not for revenge, but for freedom. You don't owe him your silence. You don't owe him your forgiveness. You don't owe him anything." Harold sat motionless through the entire reading. When I finished, his voice was barely audible. "Eleanor never told me she felt that way." "She didn't have to tell you. You knew. That's why you spent 40 years making sure no woman in this family could ever overshadow you. You weren't protecting the family legacy. You were protecting your secret." He didn't deny it. He couldn't. I presented my terms. First, Harold announces his retirement within 30 days, citing health reasons. No CEO succession to Ashley. Second, Shaw Industries establishes an independent ethics board with external oversight. No family member above accountability ever again. Third, Daniel Morrison receives formal acknowledgement and a $200,000 settlement from the company. Fourth, Eleanor Shaw's contribution to founding the company is publicly recognized through a foundation in her name funded by Harold personally, not company money. Fifth, my startup proceeds independently, fully owned by me with no Shaw Industries involvement. The name would be the Eleanor Shaw Initiative. Harold signed everything. The SEC investigation concluded with a $4.8 million fine to Shaw Industries. Harold was personally barred from serving as an officer or director of any public company for 5 years. The man who had controlled everything would spend his final years controlling nothing. As he stood to leave my apartment, I spoke one last time. "This isn't forgiveness, grandfather. This is accountability. Forgiveness requires remorse, and I haven't seen any from you yet." Harold paused at the door. For a moment, I thought he might finally apologize. That after 68 years of taking without giving, he might find it in himself to say the words I had waited my whole life to hear. Instead, he just nodded once and walked away without looking back. Some people are incapable of change. Accepting that is its own kind of freedom. The legal battles were over. The terms were signed. Harold was diminished. Ashley was ruined, and Shaw Industries would never be the same. I should have felt triumphant, but mostly I felt tired. Tired and strangely empty, like I had been carrying a weight for so long that I didn't know how to stand up straight without it. Then Ashley reached out. She requested a meeting. After everything she had done after the theft and the lies and the public humiliation she had helped orchestrate, she wanted to talk. I spent 3 days deciding whether to show up. 3 days wondering if there was anything left between us worth saving, or if some betrayals are simply too deep to ever come back from. On the 3rd day, I decided to go. Not because I owed Ashley anything, but because I needed to see who she had become without grandfather's protection, without the family name opening doors, without someone else's work to stand on. We met at a coffee shop near her new apartment. Ashley was almost unrecognizable when she walked through the door. No designer clothes, no perfect makeup, no confident posture that announced she was someone important. She was wearing a simple blouse and pants from a discount store, her hair pulled back in a plain ponytail. She looked tired in a way that expensive skincare couldn't fix. She looked like someone who had finally met consequences. She sat down across from me and stared at her coffee. "Do you hate me?" I considered the question honestly. "No, I feel sorry for you." "Sorry for me. You had every advantage, Ashley. Attention, love, opportunity, grandfather's protection, but you never believed you could succeed on your own merit. So you took from others, from Daniel, from me. That's not greed. That's fear. Fear that you're not enough without someone else's work to stand on." Ashley's eyes filled with tears. "I was just doing what grandfather expected. He always said Shaw women take what they need, that the world doesn't give women anything." "I know what he said. He taught you that because it's what he did to grandmother, and you believed him because it was easier than building something yourself." I paused. "That's the saddest part. He used you. You were his tool, his way to keep his legacy alive through someone he could control. And you let him because you were afraid to be anything else. Now he's diminished, and you have to figure out who you actually are. For the first time in your life, she wiped her eyes with a napkin. Can we ever be sisters again? Real sisters, like before everything got complicated? I was quiet for a long moment. I thought about the two little girls we used to be holding hands at our father's funeral while grandfather decided who we would become. I thought about all the years of being invisible while Ashley shone. And I thought about the fact that underneath everything, she was still my sister. I'm not closing that door forever, I said. But I'm not opening it today either. Then when? When you've earned it. Not with words. Words are easy. Anyone can apologize when they've been caught. You prove you've changed by actually changing, by building something of your own. Maybe that takes 5 years, maybe 10, maybe never. I stood to leave. You're not my responsibility, Ashley, and I'm not yours. We're not those little girls anymore. You have to build your own life now. Start there. Ashley nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, Brittany. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. I looked at my sister, really looked at her for the first time in years. I know you are. That's a start. But sorry is where you begin, not where you end. I walked out without looking back. Not from coldness, from clarity. Some relationships can only heal if both people do the work. And I had done enough work for both of us. 2 years later, I stood on a stage in San Francisco at a tech conference, the launch event for the Eleanor Shaw Initiative. The room was filled with investors, healthcare professionals, journalists, and advocates for senior citizens. The beta testing was complete. The reviews were glowing. And for the first time in my life, I was standing in front of a crowd as myself. I didn't talk about the betrayal or the lawsuit or the family drama. I talked about my grandmother. Eleanor Shaw spent her final years losing her memory. She forgot names, faces, eventually her own story. But she never forgot that she mattered. She believed aging shouldn't mean losing dignity, independence, or connection. She believed old age could be a beginning, not an ending. This app exists because she believed in me when no one else did. It's named for her because she deserves to be remembered, not as someone who was sick, but as someone who saw a problem and imagined a solution, even when no one was listening. The audience rose for a standing ovation. In the back corner of the room, I noticed an elegant flower arrangement delivered during my speech. No card, but I knew who sent it. I didn't acknowledge it. Some gestures come too late to mean what they're supposed to mean. That's not bitterness. That's just truth. 6 months after the launch, I sat in my office. Small, functional, entirely mine. On the wall hung grandmother's photograph next to a framed review from a 78-year-old woman in Ohio. Thank you for helping me video call my grandchildren. I don't feel so alone anymore. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother, absent for 20 years. I saw your interview in Forbes. Your grandmother would be proud. I know I haven't been there. I was wondering if we could talk sometime. No pressure. I stared at the message for a long time. My mother who chose a new husband over her daughters, who let Harold raise us because it was easier than fighting, who missed everything. I typed back, I'd like that. Let's start slow. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small moments, unexpected openings, careful choices to try again. Not because people deserve forgiveness, but because carrying anger is heavier than setting it down. I looked at grandmother's photograph. I did it, Grandma, not to prove anything, not to win, just to keep my promise to you. Someone asked me once if I wanted revenge after everything my family did. I thought about it carefully before answering. The sweetest revenge isn't watching someone else fall. It's building a life so meaningful that you stop thinking about them entirely. They become background noise. You become the main story. My grandmother understood something it took me 35 years to learn. True worth doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need applause or validation or someone else's permission. It just needs time to be seen and the courage to keep going until it is. Thank you for listening to Brittany's story today. Her journey teaches us something important that many of us learn too late in life. Your worth is not determined by the people who refuse to see it. Family can be the source of our deepest wounds, but it can also be the place where we discover our greatest strength. Brittany didn't win by destroying her grandfather or her sister. She won by refusing to let their betrayal define her future. She built something meaningful from her pain instead of letting it consume her. If you have ever been overlooked, underestimated, or betrayed by someone you trusted, know this: your silence is not required, and your forgiveness is not owed. You get to decide when and if you open that door again. Boundaries are not walls built from hatred. They are fences built from wisdom. I hope this story reminded you that quiet strength is still strength and that the best revenge truly is living well. If Brittany's journey resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel so you never miss a new story. Leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to set boundaries with family? How did you find the courage to stand up for yourself? I read every comment, and your stories inspire the ones I tell. Until next time, take care of yourself. You matter more than you know.